welcome back to the Runner Zone podcast. Chris, what's new, man? How's your Friday?
Friday is good. I haven't gotten around to programming yet, which is for whatever reason I'm always punting, and I say I'm going to get it done on Wednesday, but then I start working on stuff that you and I are doing, or just other projects. So, but I also need just like a block of time uninterrupted. I pop on Endel, which is sort of like Brain FM, or just cerebral heady music that allows me to focus. So, but yeah, other than that, things are going well. How's your Friday morning?
Yeah, it's good. I was in the clinic this morning and back home now, and got a few more things before I go pick up my oldest from school. And then it'll be the weekend. How was your Halloween? Did you and Mimi dress up?
We did not, and I didn't. In hindsight, I'm kicking myself. I didn't realize that this town that we moved to north of Seattle actually they do Halloween right. So yeah, the kids dressed up. It was fun. I think Kai was one of the Ninjago characters. Do you know of this?
Oh yeah, Ninjago.
Yeah,
they make good Legos.
Yeah, and so he's into these Beyblades, and then Liv dressed up, and her costume was awesome as Wednesday from the Addams Family, and she really looked the part.
Yeah, that's cool.
So we were the lame parents, and I will not make that mistake again next year. So how was you guys do anything?
Yeah, it was good. So we were the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. So my two boys one was Michelangelo and the other was Raphael, and then Ryan was April O'Neil and I was Splinter. So I had a rat costume on.
Awesome.
But it was good. Yeah, it was good. Yeah. And now just a couple weeks till Thanksgiving. So it's this time of year is pretty fun. So I'm excited.
Yeah, 100%.
So we mentioned this in the last episode at the end, but today's episode is going to be a little different because we're not really talking about anything clinically or even performance wise for runners. The goal today is to talk about how do you establish yourself kind of as either a running specific business or establish yourself in your running community. So you're a rehab pro and you are trying to basically build a client roster or patient roster of runners, or you're a coach that's trying to establish yourself as the go-to coach in the region. So figure we'll share our experience in doing that, and then some missteps and some other things, and then we'll talk at the end about an offering that we have coming up in a few weeks.
I'm laughing here because I just picked up a scent in the garage, and Lulu was just out here, and I know she went to the bathroom somewhere here because I could smell it.
You just can't find it.
Yeah, I can't find it, and I'm not going to try to right now. I'm just going to have to bask in the smell.
Yeah, that's fair. So, I know for you, this would have been back when you were in New York. How did you go about trying to niche down into that community? Was it, and for you, was it training first, or was it you were training for things and that's how it came about, or was it the other way around?
Yeah, great question. I was dabbling a lot in endurance sports, namely triathlon, but running is what always gave me an advantage in triathlon. Let's say running and cycling, definitely not swimming,
Mm-hmm.
But I was just immersed in a couple different communities in New York City. So pretty much if you saw me, I was going to be out running or commuting to and from work or over on 9W, which is a major highway over in Jersey where everyone rides their bike. So, invariably when you're part of these communities, people develop niggles, they develop injuries. And at that point I was already leaning towards going out on my own. And then when I opened up Chris Johnson PT PLLC, that really became a big focus of my work. And I was still seeing some post-surgical people, and I think you would appreciate this. The way that you're set up as a fee-for-service provider, it almost doesn't make as much sense because, someone is going to probably have more visits. It's like if they're undergoing an ACL reconstruction, they may need, 15 plus or minus, 1 to 2 visits. So it makes sense to go to someone in network, and there are plenty of very skilled providers who sort of came up through the ranks with me at NISMAT. Um, and I would say, hey, go connect with Mike Fox or Ben Gelfand and let them look after you.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, that's when I really started to niche down, is when I got out on my own, and I think people started to identify me as a PT for endurance athletes at that point, and that took care of a lot of the marketing, and people had good experiences and got back.
Yeah. So, and you felt like you had a good, before you kind of said, this is my main focus, or this is one of my big focuses is in my business. You had already developed kind of your clinical skill set prior to that. It wasn't vice versa. It was, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to maybe, have a big increase in my learning about this and how to manage it. It wasn't, it was more, you had the experiences and maybe the mentorship first, and then you started to go into a more specific audience that you were working with.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what, and I look forward to hearing your perspective or your experience on this. I was very groomed from an orthopedic examination, exercise prescription standpoint, but I hadn't seen the volume of runners yet, and I was overconfident, and I helped a lot of people, but I missed a lot of stuff too that I wouldn't miss nowadays. And I think that, it wasn't until pretty much my whole caseload started to become runners and triathletes that I really started appreciating the moving parts, and to realize that there are the moving parts related to the sport, the performance demands of those sports. And then there was really understanding that athlete or person from an ecosystem standpoint, where they're living in a big city. There's loud noises, there's financial stressors, like all of those factors, which is why I'm such a huge proponent of, looking at people through a 360-degree lens.
Yeah. So, and probably the personality too, because with any audience, there are similar things that you want to understand about them. So like runners, if we focus on runners, there is a way to talk to them that you would probably talk to differently than an individual in another community or another sport. So, having a lingo, understanding the specifics of that, and all that, I think, comes with time and listening to people. But I had a similar experience to you, and we've talked about this before on the podcast, where I had started at a sports clinic right out of school, and even I did an internship there before I got hired. And even back then, I said, look, I want to have a focus on running. But when I first started, I had some runners because no one else wanted to treat them as much as I did. But I also saw a lot of other conditions, whether it was, all the post-op high school and college kids that we would see that were playing sports, or, your more traditional kind of post-op or Medicare type patient during the middle of the day. And so I felt lucky because I got exposed to lots of different things and had really good mentors in the clinic with me, where I could learn a lot and I could get a lot of repetitions, which I think is really important. I think there's a pitch now sometimes that you should immediately go into your own thing right out of school. And that might work for some people. I can honestly tell you, if I tried to start a business out of school, it absolutely would have failed. Because
for what reason?
Because I didn't know what I was doing. Because I think I would have had to learn so many other things that wasn't just how do you treat a patient. So like even for you and I, like let's say in the last 5 years, I've learned, well, since I've opened my business, I've learned how to track expenses and how do you set up patient paperwork and what's a good portal for that to use. And, how do you edit and create a podcast? How do you edit and create videos and all these other things that have been, that I've really enjoyed doing. I think if I felt like I had to do all that right out of school, plus be a new grad and have the financial pressure of, like, if I'm not bringing people in and making money, then we can't pay our, rent at the time because we lived in an apartment. So I think it was nice because I got, 5 or 6 years that I got to just learn and make a lot of mistakes and just figure out like how what are the things that are helpful? How do I want to do this? Like what's my specific style when working with patients and athletes? And just have a lot of repetitions in working with that specific community. And I think it's much more, maybe it was that way back then. I think it's much more common to niche down into endurance sports than what it was when I came out of school in 2012. I mean, I felt like there was nobody that did that. I mean, I remember doing this when I was looking to find internships, where I'm like looking all over the place to find any provider that focuses on runners. And, you couldn't find anybody online. And now you can find lots of people, which is great. But I think that, just having time and the ability to get better at the things that you're seeing, and finding those clinical patterns and learning how to run a quality subjective exam and those kind of things. I was really lucky because I had the time to do that. I got before I put more pressure, I felt like I had more pressure on myself for other things.
Yeah, I think that's a really important message. I was talking to a fellow who is in his third year at Eastern Washington, who's a student of Joel's. And, he was just saying, like, how do I get into this and sort of like, have a somewhat similar path as you're doing, or Nathan, or, even Joel. Yeah. I don't think this fellow wants to go into academia necessarily.
It's Professor Satgast. It's not Joel, Chris.
That's right. Professor. Yeah, my mistake. Yeah, maybe we'll be calling him the Dr. Professor Satgast.
Yeah, something like that.
But, I told this fellow, I'm like, look, man, I put in a decade where all I was focusing on, and I was screwing around in New York, like, having fun, but I was investing a lot of time and energy on just really cultivating my clinical thought process. And I would never change that for the world. Because, like you said, you can't be distracted by all of these other pressures or stressors, because it's not going to allow your clinical brain to develop.
Yeah.
And then once you do, sort of, you start seeing patterns, you start to refine your clinical reasoning process. Yeah, then I think you're in a good position to help. I think it's so important to have a mentor, someone else that you're treating alongside with. So I was around a handful of therapists, but, I got to really spend a lot of time with Mike Mullaney, and Mike was great in a clinic. He was a few years ahead of me. I could always pull him aside, even like on the fly, and just say, hey, can you look at this person really quick? I'm not sure if I'm picking up what I need to, or am I missing something? And, just being in his presence really helped me grow as a clinician. And I think, if I went out and was basically in my own space, not interacting with other therapists, I would have lost all of that. I would have never been exposed to it, and it would have really been to my detriment as a clinician.
Yeah.
So, and I get the same sense with you. Did you have a couple people that you could lean on in situations where maybe you weren't quite sure what was going on?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I had both of my bosses, so my clinic manager and then the owner of the business, Ryan Johnson and Travis Neff. Ryan was my CI, and I had known him. I think we met when I was in high school. But then Travis was my boss, and they were both great sports PTs. And I always felt like I could go ask questions. And where it's like, look, I'm having a hard time with this, or I'm not quite sure what to do here. Whether that was with, a surgeon that had a different protocol or approach to this type of surgery than another one, or just a difficult patient, or communicating with maybe a challenging coach, or another person. Like I thought having them with me, and my other clinicians too, I felt like just having a community that was supportive, and progressive was really, really helpful. And it was really helpful because I worked at a clinic that was very active. Now, people knock on high volume clinics, and there are certainly examples in any type of clinical setup that are not maybe great. I felt like I was really lucky because I worked at a really busy clinic. And so the approach was a much more active one. You go into some clinics and it's almost like you go into a massage parlor. If I had gone
Mm-hmm.
into a clinic like that, that wouldn't have worked well for me personally. And so being in an environment that like you walk in and there's rap music and there's a turf field and people are up and moving, that I matched really well with that. Partly because that was my experience growing up, whether it was, working with a strength coach or training for basketball or whatever else. I felt like that was really, really helpful too, is just the environment, both the clinical environment and the mentorship aspect of it, but also just the actual environment of the clinic. I think both of those can be really important in shaping in shaping your development. And again, if you can do that in an environment where you're not also forced to have the pressure of running a business, I think that's really, really important.
Yeah, 100%. I would be very curious to see, like, if I were to graduate, say tomorrow from PT school, like how much different things would be, because
Hmm.
I do think that the times really have changed. Um, and yeah, very interesting question, but I am so grateful that I had the experiences that I had. I mean, if I wasn't treating, I could walk down 5 flights of stairs and I was telling this fellow today on the call, I said, I was really spoiled because I could go and just knock on any door in terms of a patient room. And if a physician that was part of Dr. Nicholas's practice was there seeing patients, it was an open door policy with me. They're like, "Oh, Chris, come on in. What's going on? Hey, let me bring you up to speed with this patient." So I got to see that lens of it. I got to see, like, if I ever wanted to go in to watch surgeries, all that stuff was right at my fingertips. So I felt like I really developed an appreciation for the journey of a patient, how they're being looked after, what was being communicated to them, the options that they were given, how PT was presented,
Hmm.
so.
Which would be very different than a lot of setups, right? Where, maybe there is a wall off between clinicians or between docs and PTs or whoever else. I think again, having that supportive environment where everybody is very collaborative, I think that's really important. So, I remember the first time I gave a talk, it was with another PT named Connie, and her and I kind of focused on the runners in the clinic. And when we started, there was 3 different locations, but we were kind of the ones that were focused on running. And we went and gave a presentation at the MPTA state meeting, so the annual conference in Missouri for PTs. And my boss was like, "Hey, let me block off an hour of your schedule so you can work on the presentation." Now, as a business owner, and I understand that now certainly better than I did back then. Like you're losing money. Like if I'm not treating a
Mhm.
patient, that is a negative when it comes to dollars and cents. But my boss was supportive in that he understood this was important to me, or this was going to be important professionally to me. Then I always felt like I had support with that, which again is not always the case. And so if you can be in an environment where you're allowed to grow, I think that's one of the most important things. Like, and we see that in everything, right? We see that with coaching, athletic development.
Mhm.
If you're in a supportive environment, where you're challenged but you're also supported, that's exactly where you want to be. You don't want to be in a clinic
Mhm.
where like it's you walk in and it's like a ghost town and people are there to check in and check out and go home for the weekend. But you also don't want to be in an environment where you're not allowed to try things, ask questions, take risks, those kind of things. You want that middle ground. And I think that's like the first step to trying to establish yourself in whatever your community that you're in, especially if you're trying to go into the running community, whatever your local running community is, you're trying to develop that niche there. Having a good, a solid clinical skill set doesn't have to be perfect. That's
Mhm.
what you want to do first. If you're even like average as a clinician, and I would say that was me definitely during the start of my career. I was very average, but I was enthusiastic. Like if
Mhm.
you can combine average clinical skills with enthusiasm, you'll probably have really good outcomes.
Yeah, because you're probably going to form an alliance with people, and they know that, hey, here's this young therapist, but he's really present. He's taking an active interest in my situation, and he's upbeat. Just that energy is therapeutic, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And you may make some mistakes, maybe you make some decisions that, you know, you're not really going to hurt anyone, but, you know, maybe you're not pushing them along as fast as you otherwise could. But yeah, no, I think that's great. And I appreciate that, you know, people are coming out of school with a lot of, you know, student loans. So I don't, and I think you'd probably be the same, but like, I don't fault someone for wanting to go off and do their own thing quick.
Mm-mm.
But,
Nope.
you know, I think that if you have the fortune or the luxury, you know, to remove that financial stressor to some extent, or to be in an environment like you just mentioned, that's going to pay huge dividends long term. You know?
Yeah. Well, and that's the other thing is, you know, I think for anybody right now, like, acquiring information is not challenging right now. It's not that challenging right now with the internet and social media. So, like, I talk about bone stress injuries a lot. You could learn just about every piece of factual information about bone stress injuries if you go to my website and you read the blogs that I've written over the last like 5 years. It covers all the nuts and bolts. That's all the information. It's all there. You know, you read my stuff, you go read Becca's stuff, pick another couple people, like, you'll know all the information. But, you know, you and myself and Jay were talking about this last week. You can have all the information, but you need to spend a lot of time with people figuring out how do you put that actually into practice, because I think rarely is someone's outcomes come down to the amount of knowledge that a clinician knows. You need to know some things, but you have to spend time with it. And that's probably time on the timeline of years. Like, you need to spend a few years accruing a lot of experience while gaining some knowledge to figure out what's your unique offering to this community. What's your unique way that you're going to present yourself to this specific audience? And again, that takes patience, which is challenging for all of us, right? I'm an impatient person just like everybody else. But I think that's really helpful is to have that longer term perspective of relationships with a specific community, because that's, from my experience, what I've seen is the most important thing from growing a business in this specific niche.
Yeah, relationships, 100%. And this guy was asking, he's like, how can I create a similar situation? I'm like, just double down, triple down on relationships. Every opportunity that I had in my professional career was because I established and nurtured and cultivated relationships, you know. And
Yeah.
these are people I still talk to all of my mentors frequently, you know, and just engage people, because relationships you always have to tend to them. You know? And I told this guy, I said, why are we on the phone right now? Because you have a relationship with Professor Satgast.
Yeah.
You know, and I am taking this call at 7:30 when my wife needs help with shuttling the kids off to the in-laws because of your relationship with Professor Satgast. Plain and simple.
Yeah.
You know?
So when you started, were there any, I guess we can go on both sides of this. What were the things that you saw the greatest return in either establishing your niche in that community or growing your business? Those probably are the same thing, maybe. What were the things that you saw that biggest return on investment? And then what were things that maybe you tried or experimented with that you learned, oh, that actually wasn't helpful? Or you might have learned from it, but I didn't see any actual benefit from that in the short term.
Yeah, I think something that was really helpful was to put a lot of my thoughts and ideas onto the internet, to really focus on writing the blog. I started off on I'm gonna blank here. It was a Tumblr. Yeah, that's what I was thinking of. I'm like, Gary V was like, go Tumblr. And I think he had probably stake in that company, but I would just write whatever was on my mind. I would write about. And, you know, I look back at a lot of this stuff and I don't take it down. And a lot of it, like, I look at it now, I'm like, oh, that was pathetic. Come on, Johnson.
Yeah.
But I think people were like, wow, Chris is just like a pig in poop with this stuff. And he's so passionate and excited about this, and that's contagious. And they're like, this is a person I want to see. And I think I was writing about a lot of challenges that I was facing, exercises I was doing, things that I was seeing among, endurance athletes who were consulting me, giving them strategies, tips and tricks, which, you and I both, speak bad about. But to put a lot of this stuff out there and also engage. When people would engage with that content, I would engage with them, whether it was following up, answering questions that they posed to me. So yeah, I got very lucky in the sense that I had a head start. I don't know if I would have pushed open the space to the extent I did nowadays, just because it's very saturated. And this shouldn't be, I don't say that to discourage anyone. I think you have to really figure out what makes you unique and invoke that into the content that you're putting out. Sort of like, what you do with coffee, you sort of create a lot of metaphors, analogies around stuff like that. It's funny, what I was also thinking about this: don't get tangled up in other people's circuses, right?
Oh,
If
100%.
you,
And don't barter services. If you can. Don't barter
that's
stuff.
still,
Yeah.
and that's still a mistake that like I've gotten a lot better about. But I think that people would always want to get me involved in whatever their project was, because they thought I would be an asset and maybe bring a little bit more street cred or value to it. But they never cared, really deep down, really never had my best interest in mind. They just wanted me or my name or thoughts involved,
Sure.
So focus on you and your immediate community, and really make sure, as we talk about with a lot of the people that we mentor, you have to fucking get crystal clear on your core values. And people give lip service to this stuff, but I want people to write them down, and I want to probe you. Why are those your core values? What have been your life experiences that have shaped those core values? How are you, exuding these or living them? Because that's what ultimately with patient care holds you accountable. Like if you tell someone what your core values, if one of them's follow up and you're not following up, they're going to call bullshit on that, right?
Yeah.
How about you? I mean, what are?
Yeah, I want to touch on one thing. One of the things that we talk about in our mastermind, a big part of it is developing your voice, and the core values are a part of that, and figuring out what's your unique take, what's your unique perspective. And I think that's something that's really challenging, because it does take some work to figure that out. But I think that everybody has the opportunity to do that. I think if you're trying to get into a community, one of the biggest roadblocks people perceive there is, if I don't have a high ability in this thing, it's going to be a limiting factor for me in the long run. And I would tell you, I am a great example of how that is absolutely not the case. I'm a very mediocre distance runner. And I have not ran into any issues with the fact that I don't have incredibly fast times that I can show to people, and not developing my business. And I think that's a big thing for a lot of people. Is like, if I'm not like some
100%.
elite, if I'm not some elite, now if you are, that's great, and that certainly could be a positive. But it doesn't have to be a limiting factor that you don't have, high level talent in whatever it is that you're trying to get into. But I think that's what a lot of people see. But when you're developing your voice, that takes a lot more work, and it becomes so easy. Everybody gets to approach social media, whether you produce content or whether you don't, exactly how they want to. But one of the challenges that I give anybody that I talk to is figure out your unique thing. Like, we all copy people. We all learn from other people. We mimic people. Like, that's how we learn as humans, whether you're mimicking your parents or your, athletes that you admire or whatever else. But I think it can become so easy to see like a trend or something else that is really popular and just immediately do that exact same thing. And that might be helpful if you're trying to be like a big influencer, even though the odds of that happening are very small. But I think it's a lost opportunity to figure out, but what's your actual take on this? Like, what's your opinion? What do you see when you work with people? What's your unique perspective on things based off of your experience and other things? Because I think there's a whole lot of value to that. And everybody has the opportunity to do that. But the ability to cultivate your either comfort level in sharing that, I think, is challenging, but it's something that I think is often left on the table. If you can show your personality and your experience, I think that's going to be way more valuable in your local community than you think. And focusing on that versus a lot of the metrics that people will follow on social media, I think that's a misstep by a lot of people. But I think that, developing your own voice is really important. When I started, the things that I found the most helpful is showing up at stuff. Just showing up at stuff. So, early on when I first started working, my wife and I, we had just got married. We lived in an apartment, no kids, no pets. So life was very different back then versus now. So, but when I first started, like, I would go to a lot of group runs. I would go to long runs. I would go to race expos. I would go to races. I would be at high school meets. I would, if I would get one person that I would see as a patient, I would show up at their race, if we had a good relationship or something like that. It all started very small, very, very, very small. And I think if you just show up and you're nice to people and you send them a congratulations if they have a good race or something like that, I think that was one of the biggest things early on that was helpful. And again, coming off as yourself and versus maybe just like a standard marketing pitch. One of the missteps that I made, I didn't make too many of these, is I think that race expos are largely a waste of time for clinicians. I think you get a whole lot more, but I did those early on, so you pay for a booth or something like that. And in general, people that go to races want to show up and grab their bib and leave, or they want free stuff. And so if you want to give away free stuff, that's fine. But people are not going to, there's generally not a carryover there. So what I figured out early on was, I can just go to a race expo and I don't even have to pay for a table. And I can just talk to people. So that's another thing that I would do is I would just show up at race expos and I would go talk to the people I had lunch with from the local running shoe store. And if I saw patients or clients or other people I knew, I would just say hi to them. But I think that was the biggest return on investment, is just showing up, showing up at races and group runs for adults, and then showing up at races for the high school kids I would treat and talking to their parents and making sure that their parents knew that I had come to support them. That's by far been the most beneficial thing. And then probably the other thing was in developing relationships with coaches, making sure they understood that I was on their side versus I'm going to be the PT that's going to tell you your coach doesn't know what they're doing. And I'm going to tell them that, all these decisions are bad, and whether that's true or not. And I've gotten burned on that too, where I'm like, I shouldn't have phrased it like that. Or I get why that coach didn't like that I said that. I feel like I do a better job of that now, but trying to come off as like, we're on the same team with this. And my whole goal is to get them back to you so you can handle them with your skill set. I think those were the two most helpful things, is like being present in the community and showing up a lot, and then trying to help, coaches and physicians to know that, like, this is a collaboration. This is not me questioning what you're doing, which I think sometimes rehab pros can come off as judgy or questioning a coach's skill set.
Yeah, I think the point that you made too, that you don't need to be God's gift to the earth and have all of this athletic ability or talent to succeed in this space. And I would actually say that can create a strike against you, because, most of the folks that are going to be, needing or benefiting from your services, or, if we're talking about running, or recreational distance runners, and I think it can be very intimidating for a lot of folks if you're touting, any athletic success and stuff like that. So, and if you're coming from that background, downplay it. Don't draw a lot of attention to it. You can talk to people about races you've done and stuff like that. But yeah, I think that's a really important point. And I think that scares people to step into these spaces if they don't come from some like really rich athletic background. So
yeah. And if you get people that are dog on you or don't want to work with you because you're not up to their standard talent wise, you're not going to want to work with them anyway. Like they're generally not nice people anyway. So you don't want to spend time with them. Which is something that I think you'll learn over time is, there's certain personalities and things that you want to be going after when you're looking at clients and even patients too. And then there's lots of things like it's completely fine for you to be like, I'm not going to be a good fit for them. You don't want to come off as a jerk, but there's lots of people where I'm like, I'm not going to be a good fit for this person. I should send them to someone that would they would align better.
Well, and I think that's another mistake that you and I have probably made, on countless occasions over the course of our career is, you're running a business. So sometimes you're going to make concessions, and you end up working with someone who's not a good fit. And it's sort of doomed from the outset. You want people who, really are going to benefit from your help, but are communicative, and compliant. And I don't expect people to be perfect, but, they have to help themselves too. You can't, cast a spell or, basically push your agenda on these people. You're there to troubleshoot with them. So, and, we've talked about a couple cases without going into too much detail where people they had already made up in their mind what they were going to do. And they had engaged each of us, individually without us knowing. And we basically said like, hey, I don't think we're going to be the best. Yeah, we're not going to be the best. Or we said, hey, I don't think I'm the best fit for you, but I can connect you with someone. I can say here are some resources that I think would be worth checking out to help you better conceptualize your situation. But because again, you don't want to get tangled up in that mess.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's definitely something. I would just echo what you said, where I definitely had a lot more people early on that, looking back now, I'm like, we should have just not worked together. Like they would have been happier somewhere else. I would have been happier if they were with someone else. And that'll continue to happen and it's the same thing with patients or clients. It's also the same thing with business opportunities where, it can be especially early on, I think, when you're trying to establish that presence in an area, it can be easy to get distracted by a few different things. So it's like, I'm going to start a podcast and I'm going to shoot videos and I'm going to do this and I'm going to coach and I'm going to treat people and I'm going to run a lifting class. Those are all things I've done, but I've definitely learned that like you had mentioned, every opportunity that comes in or everything that might be beneficial is probably not a good idea. Like keep the main thing the main thing. So if you want to work with patients, runners that are dealing with pain or a loss of function, get really good at treating patients. If you want to develop your skills as a coach, develop your skills as a coach. Even if you don't have social media, you don't use other things, you don't offer all the other stuff you think you should do, don't do it. You and I, with our mastermind, one of the things we talk about a lot is the importance of a newsletter. But if you have to, and how helpful that's been to both of our businesses and how to go about doing that. But if you are choosing between, should I start a newsletter or should I invest more time in my running community? Invest more time in your running community. Do that over everything else, whether it's making social media posts or anything else. Like that's where you want your investment to be. And then if new opportunities or new ideas come in, it's definitely, completely reasonable to say, let me try this out or let me see what this is. But this should be like 10% of my energy is spent here, 5% of and let me just see what it's like. And then over time, you can figure out if there's stuff that you like or stuff that you don't like. That was my experience with offering lifting to clients. So at my first job, after a year in practice, I started holding these large group sessions where runners would come in and it was after work. So it'd be at like 7:30, I can't remember the specific time. And I would run them through basically a resistance training class. So we do balance drills and bridges and planks and band stuff and all these other kind of things. It took about 45 minutes. And then, I would go home dog tired at 8:30. And early on, that was really helpful because I got to meet a lot of people. I mean, even more than the benefit that they got from the class, I got to meet a lot of people and I got to spend an hour a week with a bunch of runners, which was super helpful. but then it wasn't like I gave up everything else. So I was still seeing patients and I was still going out and connecting with people and all these other kind of things. It's very small. It was a very small investment of time. And now I don't even offer anything like that anymore, because when I look at the different things that I'm doing and my energy levels and things like that, it doesn't make sense to do something like that anymore. So that was great at the start, super helpful. Not something that I want to continue with my business. And so I haven't done that in, 6, 7 years now. So I think that, you want to make sure you're keeping the main thing the main thing. We talked this about with runners all the time. Like, if you want to get better at running, you need to be running. And you probably need to max out that running component before you worry about your recovery tools or your lifting program or all these other kind of things. Max out the running first, because that's where you're going to get your biggest return on investment. It's the same thing in business. Just keep that main, whatever the main thing is, keep that the thing.
Yeah, and as you go through all this stuff, you are going to experience failure, and it's fail, apply, fail, apply, fail,
Yeah.
apply. And then, thinking of this from like a sports specialization or lack there, like start off, dabbling in a bunch of different stuff. And then as you start to really figure out what you enjoy, where you're getting signal, then you can start to double down on that.
Yeah. I remember the first time I offered a collaborative thing with the coaches that I eventually shared a space with. We offered some kind of collaborative training session. I don't remember what it was. This would have been like a couple years into my practice. We offered it. Nobody signed up. 0 people. So we're like, oh, well, that didn't work, And so a lot of that was, we didn't know how to market anything. I didn't know how to market anything. And I didn't have any relationships to really pull on at that point. And so, you're going to try lots of stuff, just like you're going to have patients that are like, hey, I'm going to go see somebody else, or they don't get better, or you miss a stress fracture, right? Like, all that stuff's it's going to happen. And it's completely normal. And so you learn from it, and then you try to figure out, okay, well, how do I want to do this next time? Or do I want to do this next time?
I was on a call yesterday with the run coaching conclave that Joel and I run, and we had this guy Greg Mueller on, who's just a world-class coach. He helps a lot of runners and triathletes, and it just makes me think back to when you're like, what were some of the mistakes that you made early on? I would have a plan and pretend like I knew exactly what to do with this person, yet I had no clue who this person was. And what Greg said yesterday, and I wrote this down, which is why I was grabbing my notebook. He said, when you first start working with someone, you have no idea how to coach that person because you don't know that person.
Right.
And I think that with a lot of, I think back to one of my first evaluations. I was so concerned about collecting all this objective data, which is largely bullshit, because I wanted to have this rosy note that went in that patient's file or chart. And in reality, I should have just been asking them. That's instinctively what I would do if I were getting to know someone. If I was talking to a stranger, tell me a little bit about yourself. Hey, where'd you grow up? Oh, you grew up in Pittsburgh? That's funny. That's where I'm from. Where you just start to have this organic conversation, then you can really think about how to address their physical therapy complaint or, whatever brings them to see you. I think conversation is a lost art. And I think people are very quick to interject. They don't reflect on what patients or coaching clients have said. And you're just quick to do things or intervene, and nothing gets you in more trouble than that.
Yeah. I also think, going to that rush to give advice kind of thing, I also think that early on, it's really easy to rush to schedule someone. So, like we meet somewhere and you're like, hey, my knee's bothering me when I run. And I'm like, oh, you want to book an appointment tomorrow at 7 a.m.? Like we rush to do that. And versus, you can make sure that you're getting people on your schedule, but there's lots of times where like they're not ready to see you. Doesn't mean they might not be ready in 4 weeks, 2 months, a year. I can't tell you how many emails I've gotten that have said, I know I should have scheduled with you a long time ago, or I should have done this, but I wanted to try it again for a few weeks and it's just not working. And so now I'm scheduling with you. And I think that if you are open and kind and all those things to people, they, you want to make it easy for them to get on your schedule, so we both have systems that can help us with that. But you also don't need to press to get people on board with you. I think that's one of the things that clinicians get pitched all the time is like, how do you get, I'm going to get you 10 visits this week, or, pay for this and you're going to get $50,000 more in 6 months. Like that's all garbage. It's all made up. And it will generally get you a bunch of people that will give you headaches, versus just like stay patient, because you want to make sure that they are in the right place to see you, because if they're not and you quickly onboard them, it's just going to frustrate you. It's not going to, and the outcomes won't be good. It won't be helpful for the person. And so staying patient and making sure that they're ready to be a patient is really important.
Yeah, I agree. I have people all the time, especially folks who I've consulted. Like I think back to a woman who reached out to me recently when we were in the midst of all this travel. And I said, look, we can connect. I said, I'm really busy right now, but I could work with you if you have a little bit of flexibility with your schedule. But I said, I'm not saying this because I can't get you in. I can get you in. But I also don't get the sense that there's anything sinister going on with you. She was saying that she was having some pain on the bottom of her foot, and obviously I do want to be mindful of the fact that there could always be a bone stress injury, and we want to make sure we don't miss that. But I said, look, you told me that you're running, that your pain is not progressively getting worse. You're getting through activities of daily living. You haven't spiked your training. You said you're generally staying on top of wellness factors. This woman travels a little bit like, to the extent that we do. And I said, let's just check in 3 weeks and let's see how things are doing. With that said, you can contact me at any point. Now, here's the critical piece, though. You have to check in with her in 3 weeks,
Sure.
And I said, look, and I put a a reminder in Todoist, which is one of my, task management platforms. And I said, hey, so-and-so, I said, hey, I just wanted to check in, wanted to make sure that things are going in the right direction. And she's like, it means so much to me that you remembered our conversation and that you took the time to check in. I'm like, well, that's one of my core values. Like it would be inconsistent with who I am as a person if I don't, operate by those core values. So yeah. And that's someone who also, did you make any money off of that? No, it probably cost you time and money, but she's going to send every runner and acquaintance who would benefit from my help or services to me, no one else,
Yeah.
So it's just like, do good by people. Don't medicalize them. Make sure that you are vigilant if there is something going on that you think, demands your attention, and especially if something's sinister.
And make sure you have systems in place that keep you organized, that you can keep all of that organized.
Yeah. I'm trying to think. There have been a few cases recently where, someone just in passing was like, oh, I'm dealing with X, Y, and Z. I'm like, no, you need to call me right away and I'll actually come and meet you, And they're like, oh, well, yeah. I'm like, no, like, because if you're a friend or family member, this is how I would take care of you, Yeah. I think that's critical.
I see that with bone stress injuries all the time, where I'll have someone that'll call me, they'll either schedule a phone call or something, and they'll talk about how their hip's been bothering them. It's not getting better. It's hard for them to walk. All the signs of a bone stress injury in their hip, and those are more serious. Where I won't schedule them, like I will get them in with the physician that I know will see them quickly, because again, that's how you treat people. That's what you need to do. And it's work for you and all that in the short term, but people get into this business because they want to help people. I haven't met someone yet that says I'm just here for the dollars and cents. You should have gone into finance or something. But you're trying to help people, and so it's completely reasonable and appropriate to do that. there's a couple other things that I think would be helpful to talk about. Um, when I think especially if you're trying to establish that niche and you're motivated, it can be very easy to make that be where you spend all your energy. I know I've been guilty of that in the past. How have things changed for you when you look at life and work and growing a business together? How has that changed for you since you started?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've told you that, like, and you know this. I mean, I'm a pretty persistent, stubborn dude. I think you are too.
Yeah.
Um, but I think that you have to really treat this like a marathon. This is not a sprint. It's cliche to say that, but I was talking to a fellow who you and I have both consulted, and I was telling him, like, hey man, I think that, look, you work a lot. I get the sense that you're just glued to your desk, and you know I think it would be in your best interest to start, like, if I can make a suggestion, incorporate some movement snacks into your day. And he's like, but I need to, when I'm at work, I need to be working. And I'm thinking, like, you are just going to slowly, burn energy over the course of the day. You're not going to be as productive. You're going to start, losing focus. You're going to think you're winning because you're at your computer. And, what I've come to appreciate is that, there's an ebb and flow throughout my day. Like, I wake up in the morning, I've gotten very connected with my rhythms. I wake up, I either sit in the tub or sit next to the fireplace, and I read for anywhere from 30 to 60 minutes, depending on when the kids wake up. Then I know I'm not going to get anything done during that time. Like, from the time the kids wake up till when they leave for school, whether Mimi drives them or myself. So I don't pretend to be on my phone. I don't pretend to try and work. I'm off, right? And if I am distracted, not only am I not getting shit done, the kids are like, Dad, you're always working,
Yeah.
So once
And
they're off, I'm like, they know, they're not dumb, right?
Yeah.
And this is the stuff that'll come back to haunt us when they're teenagers and, later. But, I'm like, okay, now they're off. All right. I have a 3-hour window. I'm going to go Pomodoro during that time. 25 minutes on, 5-minute break where I'm doing 2 sets of an exercise. And I'll do that for 3 hours. And then, and I'll have a snack here and there, and then I'll swim over lunch and then come back and another, like, 3-hour round of Pomodoro. Then maybe I go pick up the kids, take them to swimming, like, have family responsibilities. And then sometimes, I may ride my bike if I don't have to pick up the kids, but then it's dinner time. And it's like, okay, time to power off again, right? Like, be present, don't be distracted. And I don't want to pretend I've gotten this perfect, right? It hasn't always been perfect, but as time goes on, I'm being much more deliberate or diligent about separating these things. And like last night, I went down and swam at 8:30 at night and then lifted, and Mimi put me in a position to do that, and then went to sleep. So it's like figuring out, what's your schedule? What are your rhythms? Where are you most productive? Like, I'm not trying to do deep work at 3 p.m., 4 p.m. Like, that ship has sailed, and I think that once you lock in on these, it's scary how productive and how much you can accomplish over the long haul. But it's like, yeah, having these ebbs and flows with your energy, and to also have a time of the year, where, like, from Thanksgiving on, it's not looking good if you're trying to get on my schedule. I have to pause. I have to really, explore some things that I want to tend to. I want to read more, and I used to always try and be on the gas. And then I remember leaving New York when I was younger. All I'd do is sleep, because I probably wasn't. Yeah. And if that happens, you have to read the writing on the wall. Like, something is off, So
yeah,
how about you?
I think with all that, it's about how can you show up in all the aspects of your life, right? So we've talked before about this, and if you're on our newsletters, we talked about this, where, we both have been guilty of overworking, and of having work be trying to be too many things, like getting all your fulfillment and everything out of just work. That's a recipe for disaster. And I'll tell you, I've tried it, and it doesn't work, and I'm sure I'll run into it again. So it's always a learning process, but I think with all that stuff, it's about figuring out what's your unique life and schedule, and how can you show up the best for those things. So, you know, if you figure out your rhythms, and again, this is something we talk about in our mastermind all the time, if you can figure out your unique, how you function best, you are going to show up for your patients better. You're going to show up for your athletes better. And so your business will grow just by your presence with them. Again, I think you can be mediocre clinically and as a coach. And if you show up and you're present, you'll have good results. But it's the same thing in all these other aspects, whether it's presence with your friends, your family, your kids. If you are you are leaning so hard into one thing, all this other stuff is it's gonna, grow weeds. It's going to be overgrown and not tended to. And that's not to say when you start your business or when you start out that there isn't going to be a time where you need to invest more time and energy into something. And that probably means sacrificing some other things. But the thing that you and I will see often is that, and again, this would have been my path if I didn't have a wife that called me on it multiple times. Like this isn't going to change, and this is going to lead to unintended consequences down the road. And so figuring out, how do I function best? How does this fit with the schedule of the people that I want to work with, right? So like if you want to work with high school kids or college kids, you're going to need to be open during times when they're out of school. So that probably means you don't get to check out at 3 p.m. Every day if you want to work with high school kids. If you want to work with active adults, early and late tends to be the time frames for those. And so figuring out, when am I going to need to be present for my patients? How does all this work together? And then where do I want to go with this? So for both of us now, we do things that are not just patient care and not just coaching. It didn't start out like that, but over time that's changed. And that has been through, I think, a lot of experiments and learning a lot of things that didn't work. And some things that have really paid off in the long run. But I think that's one of the most important things, is understanding that there probably are seasons where you're going to need to invest a lot more energy and a lot more time. But just like with training, there has to be a period where you pull back. And I'm the same way. We're like, going into the end of the year, I'm not going to be working as much with people in person. Mm-hmm. I need more time to really look back on this year and celebrate some things and spend time with my family. Because if my kids aren't in school and they're young enough that they still like being around me, I want to go to a movie with them. I want to go do fun stuff with them. I still have to work. I still have things I want to do and projects that I'm working on and things like that. But if you keep all of the energy in the work basket and you never pull back, it's a recipe for disaster.
100%. There's a great video that Joel had brought up in the running coach conclave from this guy Howard Stevenson, and he was giving this as a talk as part of a curriculum for, I believe it was MBA students at Harvard. But anyways, it's called Building a Life. And what he said is, in life, we're all juggling, right? Yeah. And he said, what's the most important ball? So you're juggling, what's the one to focus on? It's the one that you're about to drop. And generally that's the most fragile one. Yeah. So it's like, you can only juggle so many balls. Even if you're like a world-class juggler, I mean, you reach a limit. So make sure that, as you go through life, as you go through your entrepreneurial endeavors, to just be cognizant of how many balls you have in the air. And the more you add, get prepared for one, if not two of those to drop. So the goal is, you can start off juggling a little bit more when you're younger, you have the energy. There's so many no-code tools out there that allow us to be very nimble as small business owners, solopreneurs. But in time, you want to start juggling less so you can take care of each of those, so you're not going to drop one. And the one that, if you have family, that you're most prone to drop is the family ball.
Yeah. Or your health.
You'll be kicking yourself either way, because you'll never be able to regain those.
Which pulls me to one last thing I want to talk about. So with a lot of the people that we work with, that we talk with in the mastermind or just connect with at courses and stuff like that, they are often runners as well, right? So I don't think I've met someone that says, I want to own a running specific practice and I hate running, right? So they normally go hand in hand, that it's something to you, whether you're training for something or you just enjoy endurance exercise or endurance sports. How has, as you spend a lot of time in your day thinking about running and your athletes and your patients, has that changed your relationship with training?
100%. Yeah. I'm so loose with training, man. I may have mentioned this before on the podcast, but Johnny, who is become a good friend of the family, he's someone I help from a running standpoint in terms of helping him just map out workouts. I guess formally I coach him, but he always says, Chris, what's on the schedule for today? I said, Johnny, I don't know. All I know is that I'm going to be fucking training, man. And he laughs. So I have a watch right now. It's powered up, surprisingly, but I try to train pretty much most days of the week, and oftentimes, doing doubles. I'm lifting sort of in a scattered way throughout, but I'm not getting hung up on my data. You won't see me looking at like a TSS score. You won't see me getting hung up with power. If I feel like I got a good night's sleep, I may push a little bit, but my whole goal is consistency of training and to protect that at all costs, and also realize that, I don't put food on the table with this sport. And if it's not fun and I'm not mixing it up here or there, I'm just going to get burnt out. And I'm also competing against a lot of people who are probably taking growth hormone at this. So it's like, don't get bent out of shape if you're not winning your age group these days,
Yeah.
But I still, left to my own devices, I like training. I like competing. But the goal is to have all this sort of coalesce and not to just be like, oh, Chris, he's a great endurance athlete, la, la, la. It's like, I want people to look at, wow, Chris is, he really loves what he does. His training is a part of it, but that's not, there's a lot more depth to Chris. Right.
Yeah.
But yeah, training's fun for me. And, what I love is when my kids come home, they open the garage door and they're like, Dad, you're on your bike again? Dad, what, you're lifting again? I'm like, hell yeah. So that starts to get normalized. That's a role that training has. And I've never felt the urge to lift as much as I do now. And I think that I'm starting to sense that that capacity is a little bit fleeting. So it's really important I protect that, because you and I both consult a lot of people who have let this stuff fall by the wayside. And if you're trying to reclaim that when you're, 40s, 50s, 60s, your body will adapt as long as you have a pulse. But it takes a lot longer, and I don't think a lot of people are aware of how much capacity they've lost, especially if they've had an injury, they incompletely rehabbed it, and then they try and plug back into what they think is like just some, recreational hobby or sport. You get exposed. How about for you?
Yeah. I mean, the same thing, I've definitely, as my mind is spent on running so much, whether it's patients, whether it's clients, consulting businesses, all this teaching, all the things that we talk about, that we do. My motivation to push myself running has never been less. And it's taken time to get used to that. And so just like you with lifting, like I get a lot more fulfillment now after going and riding my gravel bike and lifting weights than anything else. Mm-hmm. So it's not that I don't run anymore, because I still run most, 3-4 days a week, but I don't have any pressure on that, because there's some days where I'm like, man, I have talked or thought about running for 12 hours today, and I don't want to think about running anymore. And I want to go space out on my bike. Or I want to go lift some stuff in my basement and listen to metal music. Like, and I think that's okay too. And that's one of the things I think a lot of people don't realize is, if you really start to niche down on something that you also get a lot of joy or fulfillment out of, it's going to change your relationship with that. And I think being aware and then, having some patience to say, oh, I'm going to need to change how I approach this. That's hard.
Mhm.
But it's something that's probably necessary. And it's one of the, I think you could view that as a negative or not, but it's something to remember if you're trying to niche down into the running community.
Yeah, I think your relationship with these sports, it has to morph and evolve over the course of your life. And you may even find that you stop doing them altogether, but you pick up something else.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I I was talking to a fellow who's a pro that I consulted, and he's like, "Look, man, I have an opportunity to really get after it." He's like, "I don't want to be someone who has a mediocre pro career, and then I'm trying to win my age group in 40 to 44, 45 to 49, 50 to 54, like, up until the day he dies." He's like,
Yeah.
"I want to be at that point probably out doing like some really fun, like all day gravel events and just having fun with buddies and maybe start picking up golf." But I think that running to me is art, it's expression, and not to get too heady here, but I think that, just like wine, like your art is going to, your running, is going to become almost that much more refined as you get older, and you may not be as fast, but
Yeah.
yeah, I think it's just important to be prepared for that to be a natural process. So many people that we consult, I think they're holding on to this image of themselves when they were really fast, and I think you can still be fast and competitive, but it's also, let's celebrate the fact that you're entering different chapters or reaching new levels in life. And
Yeah.
but you can train, you can run for pretty much, you can run deep into life. I know people who are 80 years old that are racing Ironmans, um, but it becomes much more of a family affair at that point.
Yeah. And whether you're, again, if you're like, I'm starting a business and I'm trying to reach my peak in sport, no one's going to remember this stuff anyway. It's not going to
Yeah.
matter. Like, it matters to you, and it matters to probably the small circle of your close people in your life. Who got fifth at the Olympic marathon 3 Olympics ago? I have no idea. I don't
I
even
don't know
remember
who
who
got
won.
first.
And that's the highest level of the sport, you know?
Yeah.
And so, like, maybe if you're the person that you were talking to, it's like, you should probably go do some 24-hour gravel rides now.
Yeah.
It's probably more fun for you, so maybe
Yeah.
try that. You mentioned it. We get consulted by pros every once in a while. And I was talking with one, this was maybe last year. And one of the questions I ask everybody is, what do you enjoy doing that doesn't relate to running or your job? And when I asked this person that, they had no answer. Like, they were like, sometimes I like to cycle. And I think whether you're talking about your relationship with training, your relationship with racing, your relationship with your business, it can be very easy to get so focused or hammered in on like one thing or one metric, or whether you're measuring revenue or the visits you saw this week or your time, your mileage, all these other kind of things. It can be so easy to focus on one of those things and realize that, the energy that you're giving to it is not helpful. And a lot of that stuff is so short in nature. It's not going to matter in 6 months anyway.
Someone asked me the other day that they were telling me about some of the challenges that they're dealing with in terms of the run leg of triathlon, long course triathlon, specifically Ironman racing. And we were talking, and they're like, "Have you even done an Ironman?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I've done like, I don't know, 13 of them, 14 of them." They had no clue. It's just
Yeah.
funny. Back to your
Yeah.
point, like, people don't remember what you were doing
It's
5-10
like
years ago.
it's like if you showed back up at your high school, like, let's say you're the star quarterback or whatever else in high school, you show back up and like, nobody knows who you are. They've all
Yeah.
forgotten. Even if
Yeah.
your name's in the gym, no one remembers.
Yeah. And you're going to be bent out of shape because no one recognizes you.
Yeah. So
So,
again, it's like, just take it, just have a bunch of things. have a
Yeah.
plan in your business. And again, again, we're going to start our mastermind in a few weeks, but like have a plan, but like make sure that you have other things too. Like that's the whole point of all this. It's not to put all your energy into one thing. It's about trying to balance all of it. But it's juggling, it's not a static thing.
Yeah, and I think having someone to audit you, where they do challenge you, they press you on things, they force you to, to really take a step back, or, take a hard look in the mirror, to say, who am I? What is it that I stand for? What is, I know you're reading the book, Building the Life You Want. I mean,
Mhm.
phenomenal book. I enjoyed that. That's sort of like what this mastermind is about. It's like, what is this vision? If you want to start a practice, if you want to really refine, what that practice looks like,
Yeah.
And also, we don't expect this to be a good fit for everyone. And, but if you are interested, we're going to set up times to have calls and to just make sure this is a good fit, and that the timing is right.
Right.
Just because we want people to go through it and be like, that was such an incredible experience. And you become part of our network. It's not like, we have this mastermind, we're like, peace. I mean, we're going to continue to, we have a level 2 relationship with you now, and we'll continue to stay in touch with you throughout our existence.
Yeah, absolutely.
So long as we have the faculties. Cool.
I'm gonna go
any other final thoughts? You're going to go ride your bike? Yeah. I'm going to
go
write
my
programs.
Bike. Yeah, ride my bike.
I'm going to go write
kids.
Yeah. Cool. What are you reading right now? Did you finish Building the Life You Want?
Yeah, I'm reading this.
What is it? I can't see it.
It's Hell Yeah or No by Derek
Sivers.
What's Worth Doing? So similar theme.
I read some
to a lot of stuff we talk about.
He's mentioned a lot in these books. The Long Game, which I'm drawing a blank on the author, she alluded to him a few times.
Yeah.
I just finished David Brooks' How to Know a Person. That book was so damn good.
Yeah, you said
that could be the best nonfiction book I've read in a while. I've started reading, which I think for anyone who's in healthcare or who's alive, The Mindful Body by Ellen Langer. That's really good. Without spoiling it too, check out the counterclockwise study. Just Google that and you'll pull up something really fascinating. Just talking about, beliefs and environment. I think this stuff is so critical for our work as coaches, clinicians.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And to be cautious of a lot of the data when people slap a diagnosis on you, that, they were talking about, just really quick, she was talking about, if someone tells you that you're pre-diabetic or diabetic, like, it's not quite so simple, but the thing that was really interesting is that the people who got that label slapped onto them, they're like, well, this runs in my family, and it became a self-fulfilling prophecy where these people ended up really, sort of going down the wrong path just because of that label, and who's to say if that was even your actual lab result? They could have mixed it up. Like, you just never know. And what's the standard deviation with some of the data, So anyways, all fascinating stuff.
Yeah. All right.
You have a great weekend, man.
Yeah. If you have any questions, feel free to message us. And thanks for taking the time to listen. Have a great day, everybody.